In 1977, Star Wars became more than a tale of rebels and empires. It became a shared memory that shaped generations. Yet behind the legend, fame led not only to glory, but to exile, illness, shattered careers, and quiet, painful endings. Nearly 5 decades later, what truly happened when the Force stopped protecting them? Join us as we uncover the truth and honor the legacies they left behind. Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, the anxious Golden Protocol droid in Star Wars, was portrayed by Anthony Daniels. At 31 years old, he carried a role that quietly held the film together, explaining the galaxy, easing transitions, and counterbalancing danger with nervous logic. The character was essential to pacing and clarity, not comic decoration. From the start, the burden of that responsibility rested entirely on his body and voice. Born on February 21, 1946, in Salisbury, Wiltshire, England, Daniels grew up in a household shaped by order and expectation. His father worked in the plastics industry and pushed him toward law, a path Daniels followed through Giggleswick School and University, despite lacking interest. The pressure to meet parental standards created prolonged tension, leaving him frustrated. Amateur theater became the practical alternative, chosen because it offered direction when the original plan collapsed. That sense of restraint followed him into adulthood and into marriage. Daniels later married Christine Savage, keeping his personal life carefully contained as his public identity became inseparable from a single character. The relationship existed away from publicity, shaped by years in which his own face and name were secondary to a gold-plated silhouette. Physically, the role inflicted damage that accumulated over time. The rigid C-3PO suit caused bruising, overheating, restricted circulation, and repeated injuries during filming, particularly in desert conditions. Illness once forced Daniels to miss a major premiere, and chronic exhaustion contributed to depressive periods intensified by anonymity. The toll was not symbolic. It was documented, painful, and long-lasting. In 2026, Anthony Daniels is 80 years old. He remains active through voice performances, concert hosting, writing, and Star Wars-related appearances, continuing a connection that spans more than 4 decades. His estimated net worth of $8 million reflects longevity rather than excess. The character made him globally known, but the cost was paid privately, in silence, long after the cameras stopped. Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, the central hero of Star Wars, was played by Mark Hamill. At 26 years old, he embodied the film's emotional core, guiding the audience from uncertainty to resolve. The role anchored the story's moral direction and defined its sense of hope. That visibility reshaped his career instantly. Born on September 25, 1951, in Oakland, California, Hamill grew up in a military family marked by constant relocation. His father's U.S. Navy career moved the family repeatedly across states and overseas to Japan, disrupting education and stability. A strict Catholic household left little tolerance for creative interests, and his fascination with films and comics was discouraged. These conditions produced long-term strain and a persistent sense of disconnection. Personal stability arrived later and deliberately. Hamill married Marilu York in 1978, building a long-lasting family life with 3 children that contrasted sharply with his unsettled childhood. The marriage endured the pressures of fame and typecasting, providing continuity while his professional identity remained fixed in the public imagination. Family became a constant where his career could not. Health complications complicated that career early. A serious car accident during the original trilogy fractured his nose and cheekbone, altering his appearance and affecting filming schedules. The injuries fueled rumors and reinforced industry doubts, limiting opportunities. In response, Hamill shifted focus, earning recognition with Saturn Awards for Star Wars, and later redefining himself through voice work, most notably as the Joker in Batman, the animated series. In 2026, Mark Hamill is 75 years old. He continues to work selectively in film, television, and voice acting while publicly stepping away from Luke Skywalker. With an estimated net worth of $20 million, his career reflects persistence more than ease. The role that made him famous also narrowed his path, and his later years have been spent carefully widening it again. Harrison Ford as Han Solo. Han Solo, the cynical smuggler who brought grit, humor, and moral ambiguity into Star Wars, was played by Harrison Ford. At 35 years old, he gave the saga its human edge, turning a space fantasy into something grounded, unpredictable, and dangerously charismatic. From that moment, the galaxy no longer felt clean or simple. Born on July 13, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, Ford grew up as a self-described late bloomer. Raised in a mixed Catholic and Jewish household, he struggled with shyness and a lack of confidence that followed him through school. At Ripon College, where he studied philosophy, his academic path collapsed abruptly when he was expelled for plagiarism just days before graduation. The failure stayed with him, reinforcing a long-held belief that he was always arriving too late, never fully prepared. That sense of instability echoed through his personal life. Ford married 3 times, first to Mary Marquardt, then to screenwriter Melissa Matheson, and later to Callista Flockhart, each relationship shaped by the pressures of fame and long absences. During the filming of Star Wars, he also entered a brief but intense affair with Carrie Fisher, a secret that lingered quietly for decades. Privacy became his refuge, leading him to retreat to a ranch in Wyoming where isolation offered control Hollywood never did. Physical setbacks repeatedly interrupted his career. In 1983, while filming Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Ford suffered a herniated disc that required surgery and months of recovery. Decades later, a hydraulic door crushed his ankle during The Force Awakens in 2014, followed by a 2015 plane crash that left him with a broken pelvis. Each injury forced him back to set older, slower, and visibly marked by time. In 2026, Harrison Ford is 83 years old and still working, appearing in projects like Shrinking and 1923, while officially closing the door on Indiana Jones. With an estimated net worth of $300 million, his wealth reflects a career built on endurance rather than ease. Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia Organa. Princess Leia Organa, the fearless leader who gave Star Wars its backbone, was portrayed by Carrie Fisher. At 21 years old, she transformed the role of a space princess into something sharp, commanding, and defiant. That strength, however, hid a far more fragile reality. Born on October 21, 1956, in Burbank, California, Fisher's childhood unraveled early. Her parents' divorce when she was 2, after her father's public affair, thrust her into tabloid scrutiny she never chose. School became hostile, marked by bullying and isolation, pushing her toward books as shelter. By 16, she dropped out of high school, already carrying the emotional weight of being Hollywood royalty without protection. Adult relationships repeated that instability. Fisher married musician Paul Simon briefly, endured broken engagements, and later shared a turbulent relationship with talent agent Brian Lord, with whom she had her daughter, Billie Lord. Love rarely arrived without chaos, and loneliness often followed. Even friendships blurred into caretaking roles, leaving her emotionally exposed despite constant attention. Her health battles were relentless. Fisher lived openly with bipolar disorder, addiction to cocaine and prescription drugs, and repeated hospitalizations. She survived a near-fatal overdose in 1985, underwent electroconvulsive therapy for years, and continued working through cycles of relapse. Her pain surfaced in her writing, including Postcards from the Edge, which later earned critical acclaim and an Emmy-recognized adaptation. Carrie Fisher died on December 27, 2016, at 60 years old, after suffering cardiac arrest days earlier on a flight to Los Angeles. Medical reports cited heart failure with contributing factors including sleep apnea and substances found in her system. She was cremated, with part of her ashes placed beside her mother, Debbie Reynolds, and another portion sealed inside a giant Prozac capsule. At the time of her death, her net worth was approximately $25 million, a stark contrast to a life defined not by comfort, but by courage, honesty, and a battle she never stopped fighting. Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, the towering Wookiee who gave Star Wars its emotional gravity and silent loyalty, was portrayed by Peter Mayhew. At 33 years old, he transformed physical presence into narrative power, turning gestures, posture, and restraint into the heart of Han Solo's story. The character carried empathy without dialogue and strength without cruelty. Born on May 19, 1944, in Barnes, Surrey, England, Mayhew's childhood was shaped by illness rather than fantasy. Diagnosed with gigantism at age 8 and later identified with Marfan syndrome, he grew rapidly, reaching 7 feet 3 inches, 2.21 meters, while dealing with chronic pain and medical uncertainty. School life was isolating, marked by physical difference and constant medical supervision. Adulthood brought love and stability, but only after long uncertainty. In 1999, Mayhew married Mary Angelique, Angie Luker, becoming stepfather to her 3 children after relocating to Boyd, Texas. The marriage grounded him during years when public recognition rarely extended beyond a costume. In 2005, he became a naturalized U.S. citizen, quietly building a life far removed from red carpets and premieres. His health deteriorated as the years passed. Long-term joint damage led to double knee replacement surgery in 2013, forcing him into a wheelchair during much of The Force Awakens. In 2018, he underwent spinal surgery to regain limited mobility even as heart complications worsened. When physical endurance finally failed, he stepped back, allowing a successor to take over Chewbacca while he served as a symbolic bridge to the past. Peter Mayhew died on April 30, 2019, in Boyd, Texas, at 74 years old from heart-related complications. He was buried at Azelland Memorial Park and Mausoleum in Parker County, Texas. At the time of his death, his net worth was approximately $5 million, earned through decades bound to a single role. He gave cinema one of its most beloved creatures, then paid for it with his body, his health, and a lifetime lived behind fur and silence. Kenny Baker as R2-D2, the small droid who carried courage, loyalty, and memory across Star Wars, was portrayed by Kenny Baker. At 43 years old, he became the physical soul inside the galaxy's most expressive machine. Without visible eyes or words, the character communicated fear, devotion, and defiance. Born on August 24, 1934, in Birmingham, England, Baker's childhood was marked by loss and physical difference. Born with dwarfism, standing just 3 feet 8 inches, 1.12 meters as an adult, he faced social exclusion early. His father died in 1949, forcing him to grow up under the care of a stepfather and later attend boarding school in Kent. Instability and grief shaped his formative years. Personal life brought both love and loss. Baker married Eileen Baker in 1970, and together they raised 2 children in Preston, Lancashire. Her death in 1993 left a lasting void that he never publicly dramatized. Afterward, he chose a quieter existence, rooted in community rather than celebrity, maintaining close ties to fans while keeping his family life protected. Health complications followed him into later years. Baker lived with a chronic lung condition that gradually limited his mobility and travel, preventing him from attending the U.S. premiere of The Force Awakens. While technology reduced the need for him inside the R2-D2 unit in later films, he continued contributing as a consultant. Alongside Star Wars, he appeared in The Elephant Man and Time Bandits, extending his career beyond the droid. Kenny Baker died on August 13, 2016, in Preston, Lancashire, at 81 years old, from complications related to long-term lung disease. His funeral was held at Park Cemetery and Crematorium in Lytham, St. Anne. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $2 million. He gave a machine its humanity, then faded quietly from view, leaving behind a legacy built not on size, but on presence. James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, voice. Darth Vader, the voice that defined fear, authority, and tragic power in Star Wars, was portrayed by James Earl Jones. At 46 years old, he supplied the character's emotional gravity, transforming a masked figure into cinema's most commanding presence. The role did not rely on physicality, but on restraint, rhythm, and breath. Born on January 17, 1931, in Arcaboutla, Mississippi, Jones's childhood was marked by abandonment and silence. His father left shortly after his birth, and he was raised by his maternal grandparents on a farm in Michigan during the Jim Crow era. The trauma of separation and displacement triggered a severe stutter, so intense that he stopped speaking almost entirely throughout elementary school. Years passed in near muteness, isolating him from classmates and locking his thoughts inside his head. Adulthood brought connection, but never without loss. Jones married actress Julianne Marie in 1968, a union that ended quietly in divorce 4 years later. In 1982, he married Cecilia Hart, with whom he had a son, and built a long, stable partnership that lasted until her death from ovarian cancer in 2016. That loss reopened old wounds, forcing him to navigate grief late in life while remaining publicly composed. His health carried lifelong consequences. The childhood stutter never fully disappeared and shaped his relationship with speech, while type 2 diabetes, diagnosed in the 1990s, gradually weakened him. Even as his body slowed, his voice remained central to his work, spanning 8 Star Wars films, The Great White Hope, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, and Mufasa in The Lion King. These achievements culminated in a rare EGOT, the National Medal of Arts, and an Academy Honorary Award. Sadly, James Earl Jones died on September 9, 2024, at his home in Paulding, New York, at 93 years old, from complications related to diabetes. At the time of his death, his net worth was approximately $40 million. David Prowse as Darth Vader, physical Darth Vader, the towering black figure who gave Star Wars its physical menace, was embodied by David Prowse. At 42 years old, he provided the character's size, movement, and intimidation, turning costume and posture into threat. Without him, Vader would not have looked invincible. Born on July 1, 1935, in Bristol, England, Prowse's early life was comparatively stable but defined by physical difference. Exceptionally tall from a young age, he stood out quickly and gravitated toward weightlifting, earning a scholarship to Bristol Grammar School. His imposing build became both identity and opportunity, steering him toward strength sports and later screen roles that required dominance rather than dialogue. Marriage gave him grounding. In 1963, he married Norma E. Scammell, and together they raised 3 children over a long marriage that endured fame and frustration. Outside film, he became widely known in Britain as the Green Cross Man, a role that earned him an MBE in 2000. Publicly admired, he remained privately tied to family life and community. His body, however, deteriorated steadily. Arthritis, first appearing at age 13, returned with force in adulthood, leading to hip replacements and reduced mobility. In 2009, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, undergoing radiation treatment. Later years brought further decline, compounded by long-term joint damage, until ill health forced his retirement from public appearances. Finally, David Prowse died on November 28, 2020, in London, at 85 years old, after prolonged illness. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $3 million. Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin. Grand Moff Tarkin, the cold architect of the Death Star in Star Wars, was portrayed by Peter Cushing. At 64 years old, he stepped onto the set already carrying decades of discipline, precision, and inner restraint. His performance did not rely on volume or violence. It relied on control, stillness, and a gaze that made entire planets feel expendable. Born on May 26, 1913, in Kenley, Surrey, Peter Cushing entered life fighting for breath. He survived severe pneumonia twice as an infant, illnesses that nearly killed him before memory even formed. His childhood was shaped by a distant, emotionally closed father who rejected his artistic instincts and forced him into work as a surveyor. That emotional isolation followed him into adulthood, until marriage briefly gave him balance. In 1943, Cushing married Violet Helene Beck, and for nearly 3 decades she was the anchor of his life. Her death in 1971 shattered him completely. He lost weight, aged rapidly, and admitted that life felt finished without her. The grief was so consuming that he later acknowledged moments of self-destructive despair. Illness soon followed grief. In 1982, Peter Cushing was diagnosed with prostate cancer and given little time to live. Against expectations, he survived another 12 years, but his body paid the price. He became visibly thinner, weaker, and more fragile with each appearance. Yet he continued to work, not for ambition, but because stopping meant sitting alone with loss. Peter Cushing died on August 11, 1994, at the age of 81, in Canterbury, England, after years of declining health linked to cancer. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $10 million, modest for someone whose face defined horror cinema through The Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula, and whose presence shaped Star Wars history. Alec Guinness as Ben Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ben Obi-Wan Kenobi, the quiet moral compass of Star Wars, was portrayed by Alec Guinness. At 63 years old, he entered the galaxy far, far away, not as a believer, but as a weary master of craft. His calm voice and restrained movements grounded a film filled with noise and spectacle. Born on April 2, 1914, in Maida Vale, London, Alec Guinness grew up with a wound that never closed. He never truly knew who his father was. His mother's violent and unstable marriage exposed him early to fear and uncertainty, leaving him emotionally guarded for life. This instability forced him to mature quickly, to observe rather than participate, and to build an inner world where control mattered more than comfort. That emotional distance later became the foundation of his most powerful performances. Marriage gave him structure. In 1938, Guinness married Marula Salomon, and together they built a life marked by privacy and restraint. During World War II, he served in the Royal Navy, commanding landing craft under real fire, experiences that permanently altered his understanding of authority and obedience. Years later, he converted to Catholicism, a decision rooted not in spectacle, but in quiet moral searching. Even as he won an Academy Award for The Bridge on the River Kwai and appeared in Lawrence of Arabia, he remained deeply uncomfortable with fame. Illness arrived swiftly at the end. In early 2000, Guinness was diagnosed with prostate cancer, followed almost immediately by liver cancer. His health deteriorated rapidly, giving him little time to process what was happening. Just 2 days before his death, the full severity became clear. Alec Guinness died on August 5, 2000, at the age of 86 in Midhurst, England, after complications from cancer. His wife followed him in death just 2 months later, deepening the tragedy of his final year. He was buried at Petersfield Cemetery in a simple Catholic ceremony. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $60 million, much of it from Star Wars. Phil Brown as Uncle Owen. Uncle Owen, the quiet, stubborn guardian of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, was portrayed by Phil Brown. At 61 years old, he stepped into the role not as a rising actor, but as a man shaped by decades of loss, exile, and forced silence. His performance carried a weary authority, grounding the fantasy in something painfully human. Born on April 30th, 1916, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Phil Brown grew up without the dramatic hardship often attached to Hollywood myths. Yet his early path was quietly demanding. He trained seriously in drama at Stanford University, choosing craft over comfort and discipline over spectacle. That early education gave him precision and restraint, traits that later defined his screen presence. Marriage anchored him early. In 1940, Brown married Virginia May Sharp, and together they built a family that would endure decades of instability. That stability was shattered in 1952, when Brown was blacklisted during the McCarthy era after being accused, without proof, of communist ties. The accusation erased his American career overnight. With a wife and child to protect, he left the United States and spent nearly 40 years in exile in the United Kingdom, watching his homeland from a distance while others took the roles that should have been his. While his peers rebuilt careers in Hollywood, Brown worked quietly in British theater and television, directing when acting opportunities thinned. When Star Wars arrived, it did not restore what was taken, but it gave him visibility at last. A brief role as Uncle Owen, followed by later appearances such as Superman, 1978, turned him into a late-life icon. Phil Brown died in his sleep on February 9, 2006, in Woodland Hills, California, at the age of 89, after a long period of declining health complicated by pneumonia. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $3 million, a modest sum for someone whose life was derailed for decades. Sheila Fraser as Aunt Beru. Aunt Beru, the quiet, emotional anchor of Luke Skywalker's childhood in Star Wars, was portrayed by Sheila Fraser. At 57 years old, she gave Tatooine a sense of home worth mourning, making the character's fate one of the film's most unsettling moments. Behind that calm strength was a life already marked by survival long before the cameras rolled. Born on November 25, 1920, in Purley, Surrey, Sheila Fraser's earliest years were defined by fragility rather than privilege. As a child, she suffered from spinal tuberculosis, an illness that threatened not only her mobility, but her future. Her family relocated to Australia for business reasons, then returned to England in 1924, forcing repeated upheaval while she was still recovering. She survived the disease, but the long convalescence left her physically vulnerable and emotionally hardened early, shaping the quiet resilience that later became her signature on screen. Marriage did not bring permanence. Fraser married Anthony Squire in 1961, but the relationship ended in divorce, leaving her to navigate adulthood independently at a time when such separations still carried stigma. Alongside her sister, ballerina Moira Fraser, she remained close to the arts, even as her personal life grew more solitary. Her health struggles never fully disappeared. The effects of childhood illness followed her into later life, contributing to what became a long, quiet decline. When roles became fewer, she turned inward, writing children's books and radio dramas, including Captain Johnny and Princess Tai Lu, and contributing hundreds of performances to BBC Radio. When she did appear on screen, in works like A Family at War and later Hope and Glory, her performances carried a lived-in sorrow that could not be taught. Sheila Fraser died on August 29, 2000, in London, at the age of 79 after a prolonged illness that she endured privately. At the time of her death, her net worth was estimated at $1 million, a modest figure for someone whose face became part of cinematic history. The shock is not how quietly she left, but how much pain she carried so gracefully until the very end. 49 years later, the galaxy we loved is still echoing with their voices, their faces, and the lives they lived after the credits faded. So which story surprised you the most, and who paid the highest price for it? If you want the full untold stories behind the legends, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for the next chapter.